Okay, so I think we're live. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is Care Washington, and I'm Jessica, and I'm the media manager at Care Washington. And today we're talking about navigating the U.S. immigration system and the launch of our Immigrant Rights Center at Care Washington. So this is our third episode of our Path Forward, which is a weekly live stream on Facebook where we get together with our team members and community members, and we have conversations about what's going on in our community, in our countries, and the work that we're doing at Care Washington. And today we're joined by Brianna O'Fray, our legal and policy manager, and Imran Siddiqui, our executive director. So I'm really happy to have both of them today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, and I want to read a quick description about our Path Forward, this series that we're doing on Facebook weekly. I read this every week so that we can just kind of get on the same page about what we're talking about and kind of what the spirit of this weekly show is. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this little blurb that we wrote. It's been a crazy 4 years and an even crazier 2020. We're coming out of what is one of the most overtly racist administrations in our nation's history, and we're going into our second year of surviving a pandemic. This is a moment in our nation's history like no other, and it has us all asking, what does our path forward look like? So to answer that question, or to at least ponder it, the team at Care Washington is holding weekly conversations on Facebook Live where we can think out loud together on topics like the continuing threat of white supremacy, getting the COVID vaccine and getting, quote, back to normal, and how we can continue to push our community's issues to the forefront now that Trump is gone. So this week, as I said, we're talking about navigating the U.S. immigration system in 2021, and we're talking about the launch of our Immigrant Rights Center at Care Washington. Please comment with your comments, questions below in the chat. We will try to answer them during this live stream. So great. Well, that kind of sets the tone for the conversation. I want to actually start just by talking about what Care Washington does. I know a lot of times when we're out in the community, or I'll be talking to like friends, people know of us, but they don't always know what we do, or they kind of have a general idea. So the first question I just want to throw to Imran is, can you just tell us, like, what does Care Washington do? Who do we do it for? And what sort of legal services do we offer?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I mean, a lot of times we go out into the community and we assume that people know what we do, because obviously Care has such a ubiquitous name. We're out there in the media and doing a lot of stuff. And we do a lot on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes we take for granted the average person may not know that Care even exists, and if it exists in their own community here. So Care Washington is a chapter of the nation's largest civil rights and advocacy organization for Muslims. Our headquarters is based out of Washington, D.C., but our office in Washington State is actually its own independent 501c3 nonprofit. And so we're an independently community-funded organization here in the state of Washington. And we've had a rich history of what this organization has done, going back throughout its history of so many board members and, previous executive directors like Arsalan Masih and so many others have done an amazing job of really making a presence here for Care Washington, the state, whether it's been on, a policy level, like arguing for just policies on behalf of our community, or it's, in the media, being our voice of media, but there's also the legal side of things. And that is really, in the past 20 years, that's really been I think one of the greatest focuses of CARE chapters across the country, and having a chapter that has a legal department, a functioning legal department with an in-house attorney, that's one of the most important turning points that an actual chapter could have, because then you can actually take direct legal cases from community members. We can actually file cases in-house on, many different issues that they may encounter. Those things could be employment related discrimination, for example. It could be discrimination in the school systems. It could be something in the prison systems where inmates are not being treated properly. It can happen on so many different levels in society. So that's one of your greatest tools in terms of holding corporations or government agencies or different areas of the world accountable, is having that legal tool. So we're really glad that we have Brianna E03 to be our legal and policy manager here, and she's done an amazing job in this. She's just reached her 1-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, Brianna, by the way. And just in 1 year, scores and scores of cases have been handled by a singular attorney for the community. So obviously, that one attorney has done so much, whether it's on these different levels that I've talked about, and just ensuring that we hold these institutions accountable, whether it's through filing, we can write a letter on your behalf if, your door is knocked on by the FBI and, they're just on a fishing expedition, as we call it. There's other things where there's been issues in school systems or on a corporate level, car dealership. So these are things, if you're discriminated against based off of your religious identity, CARE Washington is there to help you out. So hope that gives a little bit of a synopsis. It's hard to really sum up in 2 minutes or so, but it gives a little bit of a brief backdrop of the type of things that we handle. So thanks.
That was great. Yeah. How I always try to articulate for people is like what you just said, which is we help people whose rights have been violated or they've been discriminated against or harassed in some way because they're Muslim. So that's kind of like how, just like one sentence, I help define it for people. That was really great, Imran. Thank you. And you perfectly segued into the next bit, which is, legal really is not just the bread and butter of what we do at CARE Washington, but CARE as a national organization and all the chapters. Like, that is the core of why we exist. And, we've grown into doing advocacy and policy and media and other things, but legal really is like the foundation, right? Like, that's why we're here. So even though we're a civil rights organization that provides all these legal services to the community at CARE Washington, for years, the reality at CARE Washington has been that we haven't always had the team that we have now, or maybe the robust legal and policy department that we needed. So we had to kind of piecemeal our approach to addressing the legal needs of our community here in Washington State for years. So Imran, can you talk about how we've established our legal team over the last couple years, especially over the last year, and what we're doing to continue to grow our legal team and our legal services?
Yeah, like I mentioned, one of the biggest sort of hurdles I would say that a fledgling or growing chapter would have is to really establish that legal practice and get it just off the ground. If you're just staffed by non-legal staff, there's a big limit in terms of what you can do as an organization to really advocate for the folks that are out there and filing cases. And so a lot of chapters are referring folks, and you build a good list of resources out there in the legal community, and thankfully Seattle and Washington State has a lot of those resources. But we want to do more for the folks that come to us for help. So having a full-time staff attorney has been an extremely important step in that maturation as an organization. So we reached that in the past few years. We previously had a staff attorney over here as well, and then it's sort of just building on that great effort, in terms of just making sure that our schools are holding accountable, that we're speaking up. When we're approaching organizations as a legal entity, then they're more liable to listen to what we have to say, because there's that legal weight of the Constitution behind what CARE Washington is doing. So it's extremely important to have that Brianna joined us, like I said, last year, is like that essential piece of the legal staff taking on this great number of cases. We have Jim Maher as the legal and policy coordinator on the front lines of doing the intakes with the organization as well. We have a legal fellow as well, Anam, who just joined us a month back and is doing a great job in terms of the front lines and, you know, doing some of that in-depth study of law as well. So you can see like there's like now a pipeline that's being created, but even with that, there's still a need. The level of cases that we get, the number of calls that we get as an organization are going to be far outweighing the actual capacity of a singular lawyer, a legal and policy coordinator, and a legal fellow. So you see that as an organization and as a nonprofit organization, you need to grow this institution incrementally. That's going to grow the number of legal practices and areas that we practice in exponentially just by bringing on additional staff and staffing that up. So that's really part of our vision as we move into 2021 and beyond. You know, our path forward, as we call it here, is to really establish this as a legal force within Washington State and the Pacific Northwest and beyond. So it's exciting. We have plans, and I'm sure Brianna will talk about that as well, about expanding our legal staff, expanding the types of cases that we're taking. You know, we have taken immigration cases in the past, but it's been very limited in terms of what we can take. Now I know in the past year, we've talked about our Immigrant Rights Center. That's one of the key sort of projects that we've been working on even prior to my time get here. So now we're actually launching it in 2021, alhamdulillah. So that is great news for the community, because that's just going to expand the level of cases that we're going to be able to take as an organization.
Yeah, I'm super excited to finally like have that become a reality for us. And I had something to say and I lost it. Well, one thing is I just realized the other day, I knew it, but I forgot, but CARE Washington has been around almost 20 years now. So we've been here a long time, and we've, you know, always been an organization that punches above our weight. I think from the out, like we have 9 staff members now and like 3 managers and this really kind of robust team, and it's great, I think. But from the outside, we've always looked bigger than we are, because we do so much, you know, and we take on so many cases, and we also do advocacy and policy and media. So it's a testament to not just the organization now, but the organization that we've been, you know, for decades now. And some of those older EDs, you know, Masi, Arslan, definitely. So yeah, that's great. Oh, and we're also in the process of hiring a second attorney, which is really exciting. Brianna's very excited about that. Brianna, I want to ask you a question now. Oh, did I skip ahead of my questions? Yeah, so Brianna O'Fray is our legal and policy manager at CARE Washington and our staff attorney. Brianna, I wanted just to ask you, what are some of the most interesting or rewarding cases that you've worked on since starting at CARE Washington?
That's a really good question, because like you said, we do take on so many. And so even just in the 1 year that I've been here, I have worked with so many people on such a wide variety of issues. I would definitely say that some of the most rewarding ones have involved immigration or travel. Particularly, a lot of people run into issues when they travel. You know, I'm sure many of you recall last year when there was, you know, the Iranian border crisis and so many people held up there. But just everyday people in their normal comings and goings, specifically members of our Muslim community, are constantly getting stopped and questioned or held up, or, you know, in some way stopped from just, you know, going about their travels. And in particularly, we had one case that came to us a few months ago where it was a really tragic situation. A mother in Seattle, her child had been visiting an aunt in Kenya, and the little boy had just been playing around and fell off a bed, and he had some major internal injuries, needed surgery. And, you know, of course, an emergency like this, you know, nothing was planned. You know, nobody anticipated something like that. And, you know, rightfully so, this mom was really in a panic to get to Kenya and to be there for her child. And, you know, in particular, she needed to come up with the money for this surgery. And so she had gone to family members and community members and had been able to gather enough money to take to Kenya to pay for this surgery. And as she was on her way out of Seattle, she was stopped by Customs and Border Patrol. And this woman did not speak English. She understood some, but she really did not have strong English skills. And she asked for a translator because she didn't understand what this man was asking her for. And he said, "Oh, no, you don't need a translator. I'm not going to get you a translator. Just write down what I say. It's fine." So she took this government agent at his word. And you know, what else could she have done there? I don't know what I would have done in that situation any differently if I were in her place. And what it was a money declaration. And essentially you're only allowed to travel with so much money, but she didn't know that. And he told her to just write down a number. Yeah. And people don't realize things like that. That's not common knowledge. Even if she did speak English, I wouldn't expect her to know that. And so she wrote down this number, and then the agent was like, "Ha, got you. You know, that's not how much money you have. You have more cash on you than that. So I'm going to take it. We're going to hold it, and you're not going to get it back." And so this woman called us, you know, just in an absolute panic because she's trying to get to her child. There's this emergency situation going on. She should be able to focus on being a mom in this moment and taking care of her kid. And now she's absolutely panicked because, you know, they took this money. She's not sure how it's going to affect their travel or his surgery and all kinds of things like that. And so that was a little bit of a unique situation. You know, that's obviously not something we get every day, but that was something where we were able to take, you know, the expertise that we have as a team and work with our other partners and, you know, other attorneys in the community that we've developed relationships with. And, you know, not only were we able to you know, allay her fears and you know, make sure that she was comfortable getting to her son, but we were actually able to recover that money for her. And her son has successfully recovered, and they've all been able to get back to Seattle, which, you know, was a little bit of a struggle as well, for some immigration reasons. And, you know, something like that, you hope that nobody ever has to go through something like that. Mm-hmm. But it happens all the time. And most of the time people don't have somebody to turn to in a situation like that. And I think one thing that really makes CARE Washington so unique and, you know, really just well placed to do this kind of work is that people do know our name and they know we're in the community. And whether, you know, people have contacts with us directly or not, they know they can call us. And if we can't do it ourselves, we'll find other people who can help. We'll work with them. We'll act as a liaison. We'll, you know, get involved legally if we need to. And, you know, I think that's a really amazing thing. Like that's one of my favorite parts of working here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. Was a really rewarding outcome to that situation because yeah, I'm a new mom, but when I talked to the mom and she told me her story, I was just like, oh my God, I would have been in absolute panic in that situation. You know, your kid is halfway across the world having potentially life-saving surgery, and then you're trying to get over there and like pay for the surgery and sound like a nightmare. So I also, when you mentioned CBP, I was like, we run into CBP a lot.
All the time.
And then I was thinking, gosh, we should do an episode on what we refer to internally as the Iranian or the Blaine border crisis in Blaine, Washington, where CBP stopped, you know, over 200 people and detained a whole bunch of folks. And they said, you know, this was last summer, I think. Last January, thank you, where tensions were high with Iran, between the US and Iran. And so they were stopping people that were Iranian or had any like connections to Iran.
87 of them were US citizens.
I know, 87 were US citizens. Yeah, and they denied it. They said, no, we weren't, you know, targeting people. And then, you know, over time, due to us and NERC, basically, putting in Freedom of Information Act requests and really hammering them. It's come to light, and some key attorneys that worked on this as well. It's come to light that, yeah, that absolutely was a directive, and they were specifically targeting, people that they thought were Iranian, or I can't remember the other groups, Yemeni and
Palestinians as well.
Yeah, so lovely. Maybe we'll do an episode on that, but cool. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Brianna, I know you've mentioned, you're the legal and policy manager, and sometimes like legal's clear, but like policy can be a little blurry for folks, myself included. And I know that you've talked about how you view legal and policy as complementary departments, and that they're both necessary to the work that we do at CARE Washington. The other day you said that policy you view it as the proactive side of legal work, where legal is more the defensive and reactive, the nature of it. Can you talk more about that and what your vision for the legal and policy departments are at CARE Washington?
Absolutely. It really is almost sort of a chicken and the egg cycle sort of complementary system, because
that was a cat. I'm so sorry.
Because I take things that I learned through the legal clients, issues that they run into, or places where they come to us and they say, hey, can I get some kind of justice for this situation? And either the law isn't written in a way that allows us to do that, or it doesn't do enough, or it doesn't fully fit the situation. So oftentimes I'm taking from what I learn on legal side and then seeing how I can apply it to creating proactive policies on policy side. And again, I realize that's a little bit nebulous. What I mean by that is, in some ways we're doing some active issue lobbying. And again, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So it's all nonpartisan. But, if there's a particular issue that affects our community strongly and that we care about, we'll get involved with lawmakers and work on drafting more equitable policies, or we'll work with organizers and other community partners that are working on these issues, or who have already been working on these issues and that we can add, our force to. And ultimately, what we're looking to do is create new laws, or change existing laws, or change other regulations and policies. A lot of what ends up affecting people most isn't necessarily even the laws on the books. It's these internal policies that guide the way that particularly government agencies follow the laws on the books. Not to talk like such a lawyer, but there's we saw it a lot during the Trump administration. The law on the book says XYZ, and he says, you know what, I'm going to give you guidance and a directive that I want you to interpret that law way out here, just something crazy that is not in the spirit of the way that law was written. Right. And so, sometimes it's not the law itself that we're fighting or pushing for. It's this guidance, or these directives, or these internal policies.
Or maybe just the lack of. Absolutely. I think a good example is with schools. They might not try to be intentionally discriminatory or not inclusive, but when you have people making policies or practices that aren't from a certain community, like with Ramadan school accommodations. A couple years ago, we partnered with Senator Bob Hasagawa to get Ramadan accommodations across Washington state in higher education colleges. And that was a huge victory. And I think that's a great example of what you're talking about. Absolutely. Where that wasn't a law, but that was just how things were done, a practice or a policy.
Yep. And you saw a need for, something to become more regulated, right, and more equitably implemented. And so, a lot of what I do on policy side is informed by what comes out of legal, but then I see policy, like you said, as our way of combating things proactively. If, for example, one of the big things that we're working on right now in policy is a data privacy law for Washington state. We saw recently Muslims being targeted with their prayer apps and that data going to government agencies, and there's literally no law on the book that stops that. And so seeing these things happening and reacting to them in real time, we're seeing that there's a major need for a solid privacy law, a data privacy law in this state and frankly federally. And so we're out there working to try to build a law that would protect in situations like that, so that later down the road, I don't have people coming to me and saying, you know what, I just found out that all of my information's on the internet because I used this prayer app, you know? So again, it's just a big cycle, but my goal is to really address everything holistically, you know, all of these issues in whatever way is most effective, so that yes, if the harm's already done, if the issue has already happened, we're here for you and we're going to do everything we can to seek justice for it. But my ultimate goal is that these things don't happen in the first place. You know,
Right.
that's ultimately, I think, what we're working toward.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. I wanted to, I get poking around. I'm multitasking as you're talking. I'm trying to adjust my screen and then I lose my place with the questions. Great. Thank you for that. Okay. So Imran. Imran has come to us from CARE Arizona, where he was also the executive director of CARE Arizona, but you had also been there, I think, almost a decade, Imran? Quite a while.
Yeah,
And I know you
including
did,
my time on the board and
right.
staff decade.
Yeah. And I know that while you were there, you did a lot of work around immigration and probably the nature of where your state is. You know, we're on the northern border, Arizona's there on the US-Mexican border. Can you talk about some of the work you did around BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and free speech, as well as asylum when you were executive director at CARE Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, it just gives you a little bit of a glimpse as to it. Every state that you're in, regardless of the size of your organization, like CARE Arizona is, you know, a fraction of the size of CARE Washington. So it just tells you what our capabilities are in terms of like what level of advocacy we can do on specific issues. But even on a smaller chapter like CARE Arizona, we made some like global headlines in terms of the cases that we took. One of which is, you know, we hear about the term cancel culture and like this sort of free speech debate that's out there during this time. But the folks that are getting the most canceled in contemporary society are Palestinians and pro-Palestine activists. That's just a fact of the matter, and it's taking place on a state, federal, local, and university level. So it's something that a lot of folks don't even know about, that there's a very massive movement to criminalize pro-Palestine speech, especially on, you know, in states like Arizona, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and many others, where there's this sort of more polarized and heated political climate. It's being used as a wedge politically. So yeah, in you know, 2015, 2016 timeframe, the state of Arizona basically introduced a law that would make it you know, that would make it essentially a crime to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So how does that reflect in modern day society? Like one example reared our head, it really sort of fell into our lap with the Muslim Students Association at Arizona State University wanting to invite Dr. Hatem Bazian to come and speak at, you know, to their organization. He's one of the most prominent, you know, scholars in America when it comes to, you know, whether it's Islam or, you know, Islamophobia or Palestine studies as well. He's Palestinian. He, based off of the contract that was given to the students at the MSA at ASU, if Dr. Hatem Bazian signed the contract, he would not be allowed to, you know, be supportive of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a nonviolent, you know, multinational, multi-religious movement that's basically speaking up against a nation state that isn't, that is, you know, practicing apartheid and punishing a whole race of people essentially. And so obviously Dr. Bazian couldn't sign this contract based on how it was written. This was something that was passed into law in Arizona. So we had to file a lawsuit and tell like the state that this is not acceptable. Like this man has a right to speak, and anybody who wants to speak up for human rights should have a right as any other human rights issue would be. And so they got shook by that, especially with this being in academia, and they were like, oh no, we're not trying to curb his free speech. So they issued a statement, state Board of Regents and Arizona State University, and they're like, oh no, we're not gonna stop him from coming to the state. Is actually, we're gonna go back and change some verbiage here. And so they went back. So he was allowed to come and speak. So that was a victory for us. ACLU of Arizona also filed a concurrent lawsuit as well. What ended up happening is that they changed the verbiage to like, okay, it's nobody who has like a contract over $100,000 with the state can now support BDS. So they just basically move the goalposts with these laws. So we're constantly having to, change the nature of what the plaintiff is. So they're basically saying now it's an entity that has over X amount of employees and a contract of over $100,000 can't engage in BDS. And so there's not really a practical application of what they're trying to outlaw. They're just trying to show that, oh, we're like a unabashed supporter of Israel, and we're gonna make it illegal and criminalize that. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but this, what this is reminding me of what's happening right now with critical race theory. Have you been following this?
Yeah.
I don't want to get off on this, but critical race theory has been around since the 80s, and it's been being taught and used as a tool of education for decades now. And I think it's because Trump, got people turned on to it when he was in office last year. And so now all these states, New Hampshire, Arkansas, Mississippi, they're trying to create laws and policy banning people being able to teach critical race theory, and how they're flipping it as saying, well, this is actually racist. No.
Yeah,
this is actually promoting racism, and it's the same kind of tactic as with BDS.
Yeah, and it's done under the guise of like these buzzwords, like for that specific issue, they call it like ethnic studies and things like that. So it's like creating this big bubble around like these major issues that need to be taught like on a systemic level, and then they're basically boiling it down to, oh, it's racist, or BDS is like anti-Semitic, which it's not. There's plenty of Jewish supporters of BDS as well, so that's important to know. It's same thing with the anti-Sharia bills that have been introduced in 30 plus states. It's basically criminalizing the practice of Islam across these states, but it doesn't really have a practical application. It's just sort of like a feather in the cap of sort of these far right politicians to gain some traction with their supporters. On the asylum issue, same thing. I mean, I'm glad that you brought this up, because we don't always see like these types of the nature of these types of cases in our communities, and we don't know that these things exist. There was two men. And this is a very famous case, that were in Gaza. They were there during a bombing campaign, and they were trying to get out. Like they feared for their lives.
A bombing campaign, for those, I'm sorry, who might not like, there was a bombing campaign happening in Gaza, right?
Correct. Yeah, it was one of the operations where thousands of civilians were being injured and killed. So they have a real legit fear for their life, and they just were trying to get out. They went to Cyprus, they went to Turkey. They were their visa had expired in Turkey, so then they were sort of left stateless at that point in time. They ended up going to Venezuela, so like a 7,000 to 10,000 mile like journey over the course of multiple years, just to try and like live their life somewhere where they could be free. They entered through the southern border of the U.S., and they're in a situation where Palestine isn't even a state that's recognized by the American government. So they get to the border and they're like, well, we don't recognize Palestine, so we're gonna have to deport you, but we can't deport you back to this place where we don't even think exists, and so like they're basically in this holding pattern, held for 500 plus days in ICE detention center. Nobody knows about it. Linda Sarsour, shout out to Linda, brought this case to our attention. And, we're a fledgling chapter over there with just one attorney on staff, similar to how it was at this time. But we partnered up with another immigration lawyer. And long story short, like these men were just basically under the radar for like almost a year and a half, where nobody even knew they existed. We were able to like file an asylum case for them. We were able to get them released from ICE detention. They were able to get out there, get their work permits, and they're still, you know, living their life now. And one of them actually gained asylum. So you're changing people's lives through these processes, through filing these cases. And that's just a direction that I want to see this legal department go in with our Immigrant Rights Center.
Me too.
Awesome. It's funny, when I was writing the questions for this episode, I was like, this is going to be a light episode. We'll be done in 30 minutes. And then I'm like, wow, no, Jess, you put in some really heavy topics here. Like, you can't just breeze through this stuff. So I might have to skip a little things here. But I did want to, you know, we do a question of the week every week during each episode, and then we read people's responses to our question during next week's episode. So our question that we asked people last week was, what is a right that you have, or maybe suspect you have, that you want to know more about? And we got some answers on that. I think we had one person say, you know, the First Amendment, of course, always. The Fourth Amendment, which is, I had to look up, it's search and seizure. And someone also talked about whistleblower rights, which I think would be fascinating. And I hope we didn't lead people on thinking that we were going to answer and talk about those rights during this episode, because we just don't have the time for that today. But what we are going to be doing is something I'm very excited to announce, is that we're going to be starting a monthly podcast, basically like a Know Your Rights monthly podcast, where we do answer your questions and we do dig into these various rights and how they apply to like your everyday to day. Brianna, you're the one who's actually going to be launching that as the manager of the legal team. Can you talk a bit more about the podcast we're going to be doing?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. It's called In the Know. And essentially, you know, what we realized, again, as I mentioned, on legal side, so often by the time that something happens to you, or by the time the harm's done, you know, there's only so much you can do. So I'm always looking for, how can we address things proactively? How can we make sure that you never end up here? And in addition to policy, one of the most important things we can do is arm you with knowledge of your rights. And, you know, we were trying to come up with the best way to do this. And, you know, we want to make it interesting. And, you know, I know that a lot of this information can be, you know, heavy or, you know, really in the weeds, but, you know, a lot of it really is fascinating too. And it's so important. So, you know, we're going to be covering a little bit of everything. Each month we'll have a different topic. We'll be discussing, you know, your rights at work. We'll be discussing your rights and interactions with law enforcement. That's a really, really important one. And I absolutely want you all walking away knowing exactly what that Fourth Amendment is. And, you know, we're going to really dive into that and bring in guests to to discuss, you know, current contexts that we find these issues in, and, you know, why we need more work in these areas, and draw it all together, similar to how we do here, but really specifically diving into those rights. So I'm very excited about that. We're going to be launching that on the third Thursday in April. What date is that?
What is it? The 22nd.
22nd. Thanks, Jess.
I knew I had something big on the 22nd. That's what it is.
Yeah, we're going to be launching that on April 22nd, and it'll be available on our website as well as wherever you get your podcasts, and it'll also be on our YouTube channel. So you can grab it, you know, wherever makes sense for you. But we really hope that you enjoy listening to that, and that it gives you some good information on those questions.
So excited. And I think Nejma's going to be joining you weekly on that. I don't know if it's her commitment. Thanks, Nejma. Cool. Great. Well, let's, you know, we've mentioned our Immigrant Rights Center now a couple times in this conversation. Let's talk about that. Can you, Brianna, can you give our viewers a brief overview of what the Immigrant Rights Center will look like and what sort of services we're going to be providing?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this too. Immigration has always been one of my biggest passions, so I'm really excited to expand what we're able to do with that. As many of you know, we announced this idea last year and we began fundraising for it. So over the course of this year, we've been able to start implementing some immigration services into our legal work. So, we've been helping people with family visas, often what you think of as like green cards, getting green cards for your family members. We help facilitate with that. We help get visas so family outside the country can visit, things like that. But really what we were looking to do over the course of this last year is really register how much of a need there is and where that need exists, and starting to get our feet on this work. And what we've realized is there is a huge need. From the time we started offering immigration services, I would say about 40% of the intakes we get are immigration related.
Yeah.
And there's just a huge need in the community for this type of work. And I know that if you've ever been through the process, it seems like just a lot of paperwork to fill out and things like that, but it's honestly a really complicated area. And it takes a lot of specialized knowledge to be able to do this well, and make sure that people come out with exactly what they need. And so I'm really excited to be able to offer some specialized services. We'll still be doing family visas. We can assist with some student visas, travel visas. One of the things that is a huge need and that we'll be addressing is immigration delays. Frequently people have applied for naturalization, for example, and that's another thing we'll offer. They've applied for their citizenship and they've been sitting there waiting for a year or 2 years and haven't even gotten an answer on it, even though they've done everything they're supposed to. That's something that we'll be able to jump in on. So we're going to be offering a bunch of affirmative immigration services, but then we're also going to be looking at the policy side of these issues and working at it, in all the ways that I mentioned that we approach policy issues to try to reform these systems. I think it's really, really important that there's a Muslim voice in these conversations about immigration reform. There are so many ways in which this system is built in a very Christian-centric way, in a very, colonial-minded way. And I see it
super outdated. Some of the things are just almost laughable. It's not a funny situation, but some of the questions, like there's stuff about like Nazis and stuff left over from like World War II, right? It's
yeah. Let me tell you, Jess, my husband's going through the process of applying for his green card, and he submitted a government birth record, like his birth certificate from the government, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think that's good enough. Can you get a letter from a church?"
Yeah.
Things like that just blow my mind. And one of the ways we see it really frequently affecting the Muslim community is the way that these interviewers are taught to evaluate what is a legitimate marriage and what's not. Did you date in this particular idea of Western Christian courting? And if you didn't, then we're going to suspect the validity of your marriage. And so I think it's so important not only that we have knowledgeable people helping prepare our community members for these interviews and their applications and everything, but also working on the policy side and making sure that we can overturn that garbage and make sure that this system is being evaluated in a way that's equitable to all cultures and all religions. And we definitely want a Muslim seat at the table there.
Yeah. Thank you for that overview. I know immigration is such a huge topic, and I had some questions actually to talk about that today, but we're not going to get to it. We're just going to
sorry, Jess. Can I just insert one more thing?
Yeah,
really important. We also want to start taking asylum cases. I got so taken on that tangent that I forgot to mention that, but that is another huge part of what we want to begin doing, is taking asylum cases as well.
Thank you, Brianna. Yeah. And what I'm going to do is we're going to do a whole episode on this where we just talk about the hot mess in a lot of ways is our immigration system. Talk about asylum.
Schedule 3 episodes.
A whole month. Yeah, but and I want to talk more about the work we've been doing. This isn't necessarily new work. We have been doing this work, but now we have like dedicated staff and resources, and we're going to really start like pushing this out to our community that we're offering these services. And I know, Brianna, you mentioned like you and your husband, you have personal experience with some of that hot mess that is our immigration system, with your husband going through this and how COVID has exacerbated a lot of these issues as well. So we will talk more about all of this. It's a huge topic and something that affects so many people and so many people in our community, like we talked about. Cool. Well, next week, I'm really excited for next week's episode. It's going to be a little more light, I hope. We're going to have on, I just realized I don't know how to say Noor's Al-Salah.
Al-Saleh.
There you go. She's my buddy. I feel bad. I don't know how to say it. So Noor's our programs and operations, senior programs and operations manager. Awesome coworker, awesome person. And she's been doing a lot of work with, us working from home as a team. So she's been doing a lot of work supporting us in working from home as an organization. She's been doing research on Zoom fatigue and boundary setting and we've all had to adjust over this last year with working from home, as a lot of folks have. So we're just going to have a conversation about that. We're going to talk about Zoom fatigue and what we're doing as a team to help our staff with Zoom fatigue. We're going to talk about, the boundaries that have disappeared when we used to have separate spaces for work and home, and how for a lot of us work is at home. So I'm excited for that episode. And we actually have a question that we're going to put on our social media as well after this, and we'll put it in the comments. So our question for the week, and we're going to answer, or we're going to share your responses during next week's episode. Our question for you all is, are you currently working from home? And if you are, what is your favorite or least favorite part of working from home? So it's something that's on a lot of people's minds right now. We're also going to be talking about what the future of working might look like at Care Washington, at other places. We're kind of evolving about how we think about work and what is possible, which is cool. So, well, I really appreciate the both of you taking time to be on here today. Brianna, we're definitely going to have you back. I would love to have you and Nejma and maybe Jim and Anam on, and just kind of the whole legal team. And it was a great episode.
Yep, great to chop it up with y'all.
Yeah. Thank you both. All right, I will see you on Zoom.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay.